We've now done wire removal across a static background, but what happens when the wires you need to remove fall against a more dynamic background or even passes over the body itself? This is what we're going to be fixing in part 7 with the help of Mocha's Power Mesh. I'll jump back into Silhouette and we'll carry on with our shot. So let's take a look at the next section. Now, the next section is going to be figuring out what to do with this wire that goes over the body. And obviously there's a lot of different ways we can handle this. I'm going to suggest that we break this up into smaller pieces again. And we do one form of remove for when the wire is over the body. And we do another remove when the wire is free from the body. Make sense? Excellent. Okay, so this means that we're going to be focused mainly on actually frames 0 to 57. That frame 57 popping up again. That's where we did the clean plate, wasn't it? So let's just set our work range now. From frame 0 to frame 57. We could try to do a simple patch here, but there's a few things that are going against us with just doing a simple patch. And probably one of the biggest ones is the fact that this area where the wire's going over actually goes over a few different planes. It's not completely coplanar because we have the side of the body and we also have the back as well. And this is an issue. If we just try to patch in something on the back, well, when it moves over closer to the side there, it may not fit 100%. Likewise, if we take a look just at the side, you know, that's probably not going to fit right in with the back as well. But there's another thing happening. I want you to check out the distance between the strap here and the strap down the bottom. I'm going to play that back. So she lifts her arms. And as she lifts her arms, the whole of this body starts to change up. So it's not just moving in a linear motion or perspective motion. There's actually some form of warping going on there. And that's what we're trying to capture now. And this is another good reason for coming in to Mocha Pro. So I'm going to add another Mocha Pro node. And let's launch Mocha Pro. And let's set our work range here to the same as we had in Silhouette. So we're going to go from 0 to frame 57. And let's just zoom into our work range. Now with Mocha Pro 2021, there was a new feature that was introduced called Power Mesh. And what Power Mesh lets us do is it lets us draw a shape, such as something around about here. Let's make that a little bit bigger. Something around about there. And instead of just tracking this in a translation, scale, rotation, shear, or perspective type of way, we also have this other option, which is mesh. And if I turn mesh on, it's going to give me a few little triangles. It's going to build up a simple mesh. And what this is going to do is, instead of tracking this whole object, this whole shape as one object, it's going to break it up into lots of smaller areas and then track those through. I've chosen this frame to start on because it's in focus and facing the camera-ish. It's also near the midpoint of the body turn. So this means that I have a larger range of movement in both directions without my mesh triangles getting overly warped or stretched. And we'll see more of this later on. And I'm going to come into my mesh generation area down at the bottom. And we have two different types of modes that we can use. We can have automatic, where Mocha tries to figure out a decent number of mesh points for us. and I can click on adaptive contrast, generate up a slightly different mesh, and it will try to bring me a mesh in with a shape that basically fits my mesh size here. So the smaller the mesh size, the more complex the meshes are. There we go. And the larger the mesh size, the larger the triangles are. So the fewer points we have. And what it's doing here is it's trying to find areas that are going to be interesting and trackable. Instead of going automatic, we could also go uniform. And what uniform will do is, if I generate that there, it will just generate up uniform size meshes for me based on my mesh size. This can be really good when we're tracking in faces or something, or where there's not a huge amount of identifiable texture. I mean, we should be fine there. If we're not, we can always change it. Now, when it comes to mesh tracking, we can choose how we track these individual shapes within these triangles. So if we have our smoothness set all the way up to 100, it means that Mocha's mainly going to use the main planar track that it's doing on the whole shape and ignore what's going on with these small triangles. If we take the smoothness all the way down, it means that it's going to almost ignore what's going on in the planar track and just worry about the movement within these triangles here. Auto smoothness lets Mocha have a little think about it and decide what smoothness is going to be best and most suitable for a particular shot. Now, auto smoothness is actually pretty good, but my general rule of thumb, if we're going manual smoothness, is that if we want a lot of small individual motion, we take the smoothness down, maybe to 25 or 30. If we're getting too much jitter within our mesh and we need to smoothen that out a little bit more, I'll happily take that up to around about 80. And 50 is actually a pretty good balance between the two. So usually that is my start point if I'm doing manual stuff. I'll start with auto smoothness and let it have a little look for me. The other option we have down here is warp spline. This is useful actually, and we're going to look at warp spline quite a lot later. But this warps the spline shape that we're creating as the mesh goes on. So this is really handy for fitting in with shapes that are going to be changing over time, like this one is. Okay, cool. So now we have created our mesh. I'm going to come in and I'm going to make my shape just a little bit smaller. Let's turn off the mesh up at the top here for a second. And the reason I'm going to turn my shape, or the reason I'm going to make my shape a little bit smaller here, is I want this area that it's tracking to be absolutely rock solid. Because whenever the power mesh gets a little bit confused, it's going to fall back to what this planar track is going to do. So if this planar track isn't great, then that could have bad consequences for our power mesh. We don't have to do that too much. Let's make our color a little bit different here, just so we can see that against there. We just made it a little bit smaller, and that's fine. Another consequence of this is that these shapes around the edges aren't going to move. So that kind of adds a nice little anchor point for our mesh, which again is going to be very useful when we start to paint and patch this in. Okay, that's enough of the talking. Let's track this forwards. Make sure I've got my perspective and my mesh tracking turned on, and let's track that. Okay, so look what happened here. Mesh looks good, but as this arm comes down, obviously that's affecting our track. Now, we've seen this before, and we saw this with the last thing that we tracked in as well. I just need to create a track map just to make sure that this arm doesn't affect our power mesh. I can easily do this one manually because it's quite big. So I'll just come in, move that into place, and hold down W for rotate and rotate that back. and then hold down Control or Command just to distort that area in, and then make this a little bit smaller. Now, Power Mesh is quite sensitive to things like reflections and things that go over the top of it. So we just need to be a little bit more careful with our track mats here. So they do have to cover the area that's moving, the area we want to take out. Like this here, I could probably just track my arm in just with translation, scale and rotation, just to get it out of the way, just so it's nice and fast. So we'll call this one arm track mat. Come in here, I'll rename this one back mesh. And this is on the right hand side, isn't it? So back right mesh, there we go. Come back into my dope sheet. Let's just delete all of these just so we're sure we're not building on bad data. Turn my cog back on in the layers palette, and let's just track that backwards. Okay. So is that better or worse? Well, we look over on the right hand side. This looks great. That's collapsing in just as it needs to, really. If we look on the left hand side, that doesn't look great. And the reason for that is probably because the hair is starting to influence these areas a bit more. So these big mesh points, these big mesh areas, aren't doing us any favors at all. Let's get rid of our track. Goodbye. Let's come back into parameters, and I'm going to clear my mesh and generate up a new one. So we're generating up a mesh. Our mesh needs to be a bit bigger than where we're going to end up. Set this to uniform. Set our mesh size. Let's start with 32. That looks like a decent size. Ultra HD, between 32 and 64 is pretty good. Like 64 will give us that. If there's not a lot of movement within there, that should be fine. I mean, even 48 is going to be pretty good. The smaller this mesh size is, the longer it's going to take to process out. But to be fair, I mean, it's still going to be really fast. I will stick at 48 though. I think that's probably a decent middle ground. And before we track forwards, make our shape a little bit smaller, just as we did last time. Turn our mesh back on, and let's have a look how this works out. And that's actually looking pretty good. So you can see over on this side, that's deforming all right. I do have this point, which is getting confused by the hair, so we'll have to fix that, but that's all right. And let's just track that forwards. And over here, we've got another problem. So you can see where this starts to go completely out. It's going to collapse in on itself a little bit. I don't like that. That's not good. You know, that's not going to give us a nice result. So I'm going to turn auto smoothness off, and we're going to change our smoothness settings. We'll start with 50. And I'm going to quickly ramp this up to 100. Let's just retrack that. So now you can see once it hits that 100, it's pretty much using the planar track. Then that's a lot smoother. That's a lot nicer. The reason we don't use 100 all the way through is because we do want to have some of that mesh transforming and warping down there. Okay, I've said that there's a problem up here with this mesh point. How do we check that? Well, we do that in the same sort of way as we did with our first Mocha track. We go into the stabilize module. But now instead of smoothing or motion, with maximum smoothing, we're going to go to warp mapping and turn on our mesh warp. Now I'm going to turn off all my overlays. In fact, I'll turn off all my overlays at the top of the viewer here. And I'm just going to play that through. We're going to leave that set to unwarp. I'm just going to play that through. I mean, it kind of looks all right. I mean, it looks a little bit spiky here. So that means let's set our warp upwards a little bit. And it's still looking a little bit spiky, yeah? So this is at the point where we need to tell Mocha where to really start the warp from. And we do that by setting a number in the frame list. So this is our start point. And let's see if by setting a number later on, we get a smoother result. So set our number to 23 because that's our start frame. Let's take a look there. You can see where that's not looking 100% smooth anymore. Yeah, that's not looking great. And this is where I thought that we were going to have trouble because of, let's turn this on here, turn our mesh warp back off, because of this point that's drifting up. You see this point here. So let's see if we can fix that. I'm going to come and edit the mesh. I'm going to have this point selected. I'm going to zoom in. We can see it. So we've got basically half a triangle between the strap and where the top of this point is. That's looking all right. And then it drifts up. And it drifts up because of the hair. The hair drifts. So it's going, oh yeah, no, I know what I'm doing. I'm following the hair. And you're not. No, stop following the hair. So I'm going to bring this down a little bit. A bit more into line. It's gone back up just a little bit more again. Bring that there. And now it dips down before dipping back up. So we'll just, you know, smooth that out a little bit. Get rid of this keyframe. I don't like that keyframe. There we go. There we go. And that's looking a lot better. I can do a similar sort of thing to this one here. So you can see where that one is. Come over to that keyframe. Just bring that back into line. And that's just going to smooth everything out a little bit there. And what about this stuff that's going on over here? Well, let's take a look. We're looking at these points. And they're fine up until about here. Let's add a little keyframe in there. Bring this over closer to the strap. Or actually, that's just the wire. Move it close to the wire. And when it's completely drifted out, let's bring that back again. Somewhere around there. Somewhere around there. And you're somewhere around there. See these bits? When the body's curved around. That's actually working out as it should do. But it's these areas here. If I come back into stabilize, go to my mesh warp, these areas here where there just aren't, you know, any pixels to really pick up on. That's why we're getting these big smooth, or these big spikes. I'm not going to be too worried about those. I do want this area here to be less spiky though. I'm going to pay particular attention to what these points are doing. Last thing to look for is just down here. This one here, just make sure that that's, what, about 1/5 of the way through on the diagonal. And it's not anymore, so let's just bring that over. It slipped down a little bit. Let's bring it back up. Looking better. One last thing before we start to use this. If we're ever having to do a huge amount of work to try to get this locked into place, that's usually a sign that we just need to retrack. I'm going to see how this works. If this doesn't look good, then I'm not going to go too far down the road in trying to repair it. I'm just going to retrack it and try and fix it that way. Again, like I'm just going to reiterate what I said in the last time. Spending an extra 3 minutes getting a better track area here just by changing up the parameters is going to make so much more sense than spending 45 minutes trying to manually tweak things and then just manually paint over them. There's a time and a place for manual paint. Don't worry, we will get to it. But we want to do it as little as humanly possible. Okay, remember what our frame is on our frame list. Frame 23. Very, very important. Because this is the frame we're going to paint, and this is the frame we're going to be warping out from that paint. Frame 23. We've now taken our first look at Power Mesh and tracked in a nice stable area on the body. So let's take a short break, and when we return, I'll use that Power Mesh data together with a bit more paint and roto in Silhouette to create an invisible blend and one less section of wire to worry about. So I'll see you again in exercise 8.